As I said, the mission of our startup is access. So we want this to be really as interactive as possible. And what Paul's going to talk about is funding from a VC perspective, what companies should do, shouldn't do, and just funding in general. And Scott is going to talk about it from an entrepreneur's perspective. He's had a long, hard road, but everything is coming up roses now. So we're going to turn it over to them. And please, just if you have a question, raise your hand. I will come around with a mic. Thanks.
Okay. You want me to start on something?
So why don't you talk a little bit about our background? Sorry, this chair keeps spinning. I'm facing the wall. So I'm Scott. I run a company called Classy. We are most commonly known as a fundraising platform for nonprofits and social enterprises. The vision's a little bit bigger than that. Our goal is to actually help nonprofits, social enterprises, corporations, governments eventually solve social problems faster than we're solving it now. So anything from a social problem that may exist in a local community, something simple like building a park, to poverty in a country overseas, and everything in between. It's a combination of basically funding and also making data more transparent and visible, allowing organizations to tell the story of their impact, and then allowing funders to understand what organizations, whether it's a nonprofit or even a corporation, is actually moving the needle on the social problem they're addressing and helping facilitate that funding in the right direction. So that's kind of the broad stroke. I've been doing it for a long time. We've been a software company for 4.5 years. We launched the platform in 2011. We actually started 4 years before that. So I've been doing it for about 8 years. Before I was a boring management consultant right out of school, industrial engineer doing ops stuff. And the company actually was founded with a pub crawl. It sounds kind of silly, but it was myself and a couple buddies in our apartment in San Diego. And we were talking about how we could raise some money for the American Cancer Society and not be as, considered a bunch of bums basically by the beach. My mom had cancer growing up, and my co-founder's dad had passed away from cancer, unfortunately. And so we literally, our brilliant idea was to start a pub crawl and get cash together from our friends and family. And when we were planning the event, the movie Anchorman happened to be on in the background. And if you've seen that movie, Will Ferrell says the catchphrase, "You stay classy, San Diego." And so my buddy Pete said, well, why don't we just name this pub crawl the Stay Classy Pub Crawl? Never thinking in a million years it would actually turn into a real company. And the reason why Roger called it Stay Classy is the original name of the company was Stay Classy for many, many years. That one pub crawl turned into literally dozens of fundraising events, from pub crawls to eventually races and runs to tailgates to concerts. We were raising tens of thousands of dollars for local nonprofit projects, literally by just rallying millennials around. So rallying millennials together around fundraising events and connecting them directly with the impact that their dollars were going to. So we learned a lot about building communities. Eventually, the sort of jury-rigged technology that we're using at the time, it was like PayPal, Evite, MySpace, eventually Facebook. We were actually using MySpace to promote these events. I'm dating myself a little bit. It just wasn't working for us, where the events were getting to be thousands of people, literally. So we went on Craigslist and hired a developer to build the alpha version of Classy, literally for our own fundraising events. My co-founder and I were engineers, weren't software developers, so we just got lucky, and literally the guy on Craigslist, Pete, became our VP of engineering. The alpha version of Classy allowed our attendees to purchase a ticket to the concert, say, and then create a personal fundraising page, and then go out and solicit donations to their friends and family. So it was a really early version of crowdfunding or peer-to-peer fundraising. We didn't even really, and to be honest, we didn't even really know that we had a product that we could sell. The organizations that were benefiting directly through our events actually cued us in and said, hey, we're using this product. It's not even half as good from this company called Blackbaud. Do you think we could use yours? And we were like, who the hell is Blackbaud? It turns out they're a $2 billion company that's been sitting on the throne of the nonprofit space for a long time. So we threw our hat in the ring and phased out all the physical events and became a technology company. So that's the overall journey, and I'm sure we'll get into the financing a lot. But it's been a long ride. Oh, and Bullpen invested in us. They're a little crazy to have believed in us. No, they invested about a year and a half ago and have been phenomenal partners. So we'll definitely dive into that soon.
Awesome, thanks. I guess I'll jump in and we'll talk a little bit about how we met Classy in a minute, but I think that one of the most useful things I can say is give you a little taxonomy of how crazy the funding world has become. You know, I started 4 companies going back to 1989, and up until even my last company formed in 2005, you know, you had to raise a Series A before you were able to start the company because it cost $1 million or $2 million, and I'm sure you've heard the story about how cheap it is to start companies. But maybe the part of the story you haven't heard is how crazy the ecosystem is before the seed round now. So back when it started getting cheap, the A round was replaced by the seed round. Well, you know, in front of the seed round, you've now got incubators, accelerators, dorm room funds, you've got crowdfunding, you've got angels, you've got super angels. I mean, it's absolutely insane what the bar is to go and get seed financing now, because seed financing no longer means seed, it means first institutional money. And if I would give one piece of advice for all of you entrepreneurs who I imagine are on the somewhat early stage if you're at this group, it's don't be insulted by that statement. Seed companies that are raising their seed rounds are already making $1 million in revenue. And you sit there and you go, I don't understand. It's because there's this whole universe of funding sources in front of the institutional seed funds that are the right places for you to get going. And it's just crazy to me. You are very lucky to be wanting to start a company in this environment from that standpoint, because we've never had such a variety of funding sources available to you. And figuring out how to navigate the waters is kind of complicated because there's actually so many choices, whereas there used to be this one monolithic product called a Series A. And it's just a truly completely different world. And I would kind of start my discussion right there, and it's kind of a bit how we met Scott. And
yeah, we had raised, so we went through that exact path actually, mainly because we were down in San Diego. I was a first-time entrepreneur. Investors still thought we were a pub crawl company. A lot of problems early on raising money. But you know, it took us a while to really find our stride. But we raised literally our seed round was from First Degree Network, friends and family. I mean, I begged and stole practically, begged people to support us. But it ended up being a $5 million angel round. It was all said and done. So no institutions up in, you know, I think Bullpen, Salesforce, and Venture 51 were the first institutions that actually invested in Classy. And again, part of that was out of necessity. For being a first-time entrepreneur, it's much harder to raise money. And part of it was we were down in San Diego. It's a lack of a network there compared to the Bay Area. But actually, the third part was our space. There weren't a whole lot of success stories in our space, so it was really difficult for us to make the case early on without a lot of traction. So we actually needed almost more traction to raise that, you know, a significant amount of money.
And what Scott's saying is actually another very interesting point about fundraising. Fundraising is fashion, and sometimes pink is in and sometimes purple is in. And if you're purple when pink is in, life really stinks. We have a company in New York City called Namely that's in the HR space. And when Zenefits raises it at $4.5 billion, I'm going to tell you, pink is in and they're pink. But when we invested in that company, HR was boring and uninteresting, and they were sitting around going, how come no one cares about HR? And the same thing happens to a guy like Scott. He's in products for .orgs. Well, who the hell invests in products for .orgs? Now all of a sudden, he's becoming sexy and he wears purple and purple's in, and now everybody's going to start going to chase it. He's going to tell you a bit about a nice round of financing that's coming together that's really going to put the company on the map, and all of a sudden, guess what's going to happen? All these companies in the backwater are going to come out because that's going to now be safe. Because the dirty secret of venture capital is very few venture capitalists are actually risk takers. They're actually some of the worst crowd animals you'll ever see in your life. It is a very herd mentality industry, which is ironic because we fund disruption. But very few of us are actually capable of seeing the new idea. It's only once, oh my God, blank invested in a .org company, ooh, we need one of them. And I learned this from my partner. Rich Melman started the fund with me. He started Electronic Arts back in 1982. He said, Martino, I got to tell you a story. Back in the day, you know, it was, well, disk drives are hot. Sequoia's got a disk drive company. I need a disk drive company. And then that bubble burst. And then this thing called the PC came around, and they said, well, you know, Kleiner's got a PC company. We need a PC company. And what would happen is every space would have one forward-leaning investor and 20 copycats. And then you'd have to try and figure out the winner. And this is the history of venture to this day. And the thing that's cool now is there are so many one-off, unique ideas that you can't actually go and have 10 blanks because so many of the ideas are so bizarre and off the cuff that you can't say, well, I have the one disk drive company. But I would make a bold prediction right now. When Scot's financing happens and he really gets on the map, this kind of quirky San Diego company's raised a bunch of money, all of a sudden our phones are going to ring off the hook and they're going to go, hey Martino, how come you were in this .org thing? That's pretty cool. And 5 other companies who Scott doesn't want to see financed are going to get financed because he's now in fashion. And that's a funny and frustrating and, you know, challenging part of being an entrepreneur raising money.
Yeah, I think another story around that, and I think you're absolutely right. But when we first came out, I mean, we basically launched our platform around the same time Kickstarter started, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, which is in San Diego, and a lot of crowdfunding platforms. But we didn't have the network to go out and raise money the way that those guys were. And so, in a way, they started owning the mind share of the investor community. And rather than billing ourselves as the next, you know, Kickstarter for charities, we had to find a unique angle. And it was really important to us to find someone like Paul and other investors that really believed in the true vision and not have us sort of paint a story to, again, go with the herd mentality. It would have been easier for us to say, hey, we're the Kickstarter for charities, like, come to us. And that's not really what we were trying to build. We wanted to stay true to our vision. It made it really hard to actually raise money because .org's back office suite for .org's was not in yet. We could have just said, hey, we're the Kickstarter for charities. But we potentially would have found the wrong investor and been pointed down the wrong direction. So we stuck to our guns and said, listen, this is actually a huge opportunity. And it took us longer to raise money, but once we found the right partners that believed in us, you know, it turns out others were interested, and now it's becoming a lot easier to raise money. It's never easy, but it's certainly 100% different than it used to be.
And I'll finish that kind of thread with it's more fun this way to some extent, and I'll tell it to you by analogy. One of the companies, one of the first investments in our fund is a company called FanDuel in the fantasy sports space. And the reason I love this company so much is Nigel, the CEO, pitched 78 venture funds and got 77 zeros. 77 out of 78 funds said no to him when he started the company and it was growing. He already had numbers on the board. Oh, it's a weird company out of Scotland. Oh, there's never been a big exit in sports. Oh, fantasy's a weird thing that only geeks play in their basements, right? Everybody had their excuses. And FanDuel is going to be a multi-billion-dollar company. It's not just a single billion-dollar company. This is going to be probably a $5 to $10 billion outcome. And now that it's clear to everyone, with their, the revenues are hundreds of millions of dollars, doing billions of dollars in entry fees into their contests. Everyone calls up and says, Paul, Nigel, Paul, you were the first U.S. investor. Nigel, how come you didn't show me that deal? I would have loved to have been in that deal earlier. And you know what's really fun is to send them the email where you tried to twist their arm to come into the round and go, do you remember this? When I said about 18 months ago this was going to be kind of big and I needed your help to do the round. Oh yeah, well, the company, it wasn't clear that it was a winner then. I'm like, well, there was your email, that was your invitation, so sorry, this party's closed. Let's go on to the next one. I got to tell you, that is even more fun than when everybody wants to join the party. And if you get off on that kind of story, then being an entrepreneur is for you.
Yeah. Honestly, there's nothing better than proving your investors right. So when someone bets on you early, and that's the 1 out of the 70, and we were probably in a similar boat to FanDuel. Myself and my business partner Pat literally walked up and down Sand Hill Road in the early days. Met with Andreessen, met with everyone. Andreessen had literally just been founded. We were a little too early. We could talk about when is the best time to raise the rounds and all that, but we got all no's, zero term sheets. We tried multiple times. Again, probably weren't the best. It wasn't probably the best strategy at the time, but got just blanked. And again, when even in the early days, you would have called our first 5 million of angels. We probably had 500,000 of that, 5 million, maybe $1 million. Would be considered smart money. So we had $4 million of dumb money. I've never heard a more insulting term in my life than just dumb money, because you know what, those people believed in us before the top tier 1A VCs would even talk to us. And so I'm going to work really, really freaking hard for those first 4 million of investors. I'm not going to let them down. And I think that having that relationship with any of your investors and communicating to them the good and the bad and the ugly, regardless of where you're from or where you're at as a company, is going to build that trust and loyalty, and you know, it's going to really create the bond when there is a down moment and you need them to rally around you. And we've certainly had lots of those throughout the journey.
Can I just a couple of anecdotes here with respect to Scott and why I think, you know, he's such a great role model for entrepreneurs. Well, firstly, my secretary said to me one day, you know, it's really weird, Scott and Pat, have you noticed every meeting that they make is for 12 o'clock? Lunch, we provide lunch when they come. These guys were tapped out, maxed out, and setting their appointments for noon.
They were good sandwiches.
Yeah. So I think two instances that I've seen where Scott has really shown his mettle and has come to funding and being an amazing CEO. He was running out of money. Basically, he had a week left of run rate and payroll coming up. And we were doing a convertible debt. And he said, man, I've got these guys in from Vegas. They're going to put in $500,000, but they want to like change this term and that term and this term and that term. I said, Scott, yeah, we're doing $1 million raise. Okay, 500,000 is really important. So let's just talk about what are we going to get at the closing. Well, the guy's coming in with 50. And then, but like after that, you know, all of his buddies are going to come in, and they went, I said, you know what, for $50,000, they are going to completely screw up your entire round, your $1 million round, for $50,000. The 450 may not come in. And you know, we talked about it for quite a while, and I said, I'm not telling you not to take it because you got payroll. I'm just telling you it's going to affect your upside in the most dramatic way. And we went through it. He said, you know what, let me think about it. Called me back about an hour later, and he said, you know what, I turned that down. I don't know how I'm going to make payroll. I'm like, holy crap. Now I've got this responsibility. You know? So luckily, we made a couple of calls. We raised $200,000 in 24 hours, 36 hours. And that was the first time. The second time, being able to turn down money with absolutely no clue where anything is going to come from, and knowing that you've got payroll, people that will probably walk if you cannot make it in some days. That was an amazing decision, and that was the beginning of, you know, what I saw as a truly, truly incredible entrepreneur. Second one was I introduced Scott to an investor. We were going to do a $3 million round. We was going through negotiating the term sheet, and right before the closing, they started changing terms.
We had signed the term sheet.
Yeah, we signed the term sheet. We were going for the closing. $3 million. We had a large AR, so it was, I definitely wanted this deal to close. But I got this horrible, horrible feeling that these investors were predatory. The terms that they were changing. And it was the day before the closing. I called Scott up and I said, Scott, all of these terms are changing. These guys are predatory. I'm not telling you not to do this deal. You know, I should be telling you to do this deal, make our accounting department really, really, really happy. We had like 3 years of AR. I said, but in good conscience, I just can't tell you to take this deal because of these particular things. I think these guys are going to eat you alive. And I felt this huge responsibility because I turned Scott onto that. Second time, he really showed his cojones. We talked about it, he thought about it, came back to me the next morning and said, I'm walking from this deal. Day before closing. And I can honestly tell you where he is today and the investors that he has today, he would never have had if he hadn't made that tough decision. And I think that lesson, from Scott in terms of not taking money, even if you are absolutely desperate, if it's the wrong money that's going to screw you. I had another client, same thing, he's going to take this deal. I said, you know what, with this deal, you're dead. You just don't know it. You're the walking dead. And it just made all the difference. When I think back to that day, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah, and that was after our struggle walking up and down Santa Road with brand VCs, and we just weren't getting any traction. And Roger was just trying to open up his Rolodex, introduce us to this group. It was all going extremely well, all positive signs. They just didn't have a great track record in general. didn't have a large portfolio, fairly new, so it was very uncertain. And I didn't even understand half the terms at this point. I've become much more savvy in financings. But the thing that really turned us off about that deal was they actually got us on the phone and they connected us with this group. And we have this thing called the Classy Awards, which is now the largest philanthropy award show in the country. But that actually grew from a really tiny event. And it was just to show appreciation to the nonprofits in San Diego and to shine a light on the amazing innovations that they were doing, because typically the nonprofit sector is not necessarily known as innovative, so we saw it as an issue and also a great brand opportunity. So we started this award show. So these guys put us on the phone right before close, and it turns out, like halfway through the call, we realized that the person on the other end is literally, they had maybe said something to him before that we were going to shop the awards around and sell it because they didn't think that it made sense. They thought we were spending too much money on this production of this award show. And you know, it was kind of like eating a little bit of our soul. And when we kind of realized that they had these side conversations with these folks, even though it wasn't our core business, and we had so many internal debates whether we should be doing this award show or not, it showed their true color. And we're very lucky for that call to have happened, because it raised the red flag. Then we immediately get the call from Roger, and it made the decision much easier. But the point of that story is that we truly believed in what the awards were doing, and yes, we were probably spending way too much money on that at the stage. It's now one of the most valuable assets we have as a company, and it also is the way that we communicate to the sector what we stand for, and it literally is the #1 biggest reflection of our brand out there. You can't measure it by leads, although we get leads off it, but you can measure it in brand value, and it's really put our name on the map. And if we had closed that deal, they would have basically sold off the awards, or at least tried to force us to sell off the awards, and that would have been the biggest mistake ever. So actually walking away with our term sheet was the best thing we ever did.
Absolutely.
In another moment where we couldn't make payroll 30 days later. And what was interesting is what ended up happening, I don't know if you guys remember a campaign called Coney 2012. It was done by Invisible Children. It was the largest viral video of all time. 150 million views, and then the founder went and he took all his clothes off, he had a medical breakdown, and he went to the hospital. So Invisible Children was our first client. And so, like, you know, the first year was, the way we charge clients, it's a combination of SaaS subscription and also transaction fees. And for the first year, I mean, we're just trying to figure out the platform. You know, some organizations were taking off on it, some really weren't. So we're really spinning our wheels. Invisible Children was one of those ones that were sort of on the ascent. We were trying to study them and work with them and figure out, like, well, why are they taking off when others aren't, et cetera, et cetera. So at this moment of really, you know, utter depression across the company, people were relying on this funding coming in. They finally get real salaries, all these things. Coney 2012 hits literally 30 days later, and Invisible Children raised $4 million in 30 days on our platform, and we made a couple $100 grand, which literally helped us make payroll that next increment, which was, you know, unbelievable. So we are forever you know, indebted to Invisible Children and that campaign for keeping the lights on at Classy, which was pretty amazing.
Let me make two comments, and then maybe we got questions.
Yeah.
Or you tell me. So let me make two comments on the story about Scott. The first one is the following. So Eyal sitting in the audience there, he was my wife's grad school office mate 15 years ago. So funny to run into him a while ago. And we were talking briefly before about, you know, what it takes to be an entrepreneur and what it takes to really capitalize. And what Scott's talking about was the example I told to Eyal. Every great company had a lucky break. It was the companies that had worked hard and prepared to be able to take advantage of their lucky break. That's the difference between the winners and the losers in this game. There's almost no great company that gets to a huge outcome that can't point to a story like that and go, oh my God, you won't believe what happened. But it's what happened in the 24 hours and 48 hours after that lucky break that separates the winners from the losers. And the preparedness that Scott had in the 2 to 3 years of development prior to that day happening is why he was able to turn the company into what he did. And that's somewhat unsatisfying and scary when you really think about it, because it means you've got to wait for your lucky break. But it is absolutely true. If you don't capitalize when it happens, you'll never be a big winner. And sorry, if you think you're so smart that you'll make your own lucky break, it's very unlikely that's the case. I promise you, Scott did not sit there and go, this crazy dude who's going to end up naked on the beach is actually going to be what saves my company.
Absolutely not.
And the second point was more to Scott having the balls to say no to the money. I was very fortunate in my last company to have Bill Campbell be my CEO advisor. And Bill Campbell is one of the most awesome, legendary dudes in this town there is. And to have him be a CEO advisor is one of the most cherished memories I have of being in this town. And he taught me one lesson that went somewhat like this. It goes, you know, Martino, you go into a board meeting and every once in a while you think the board's wrong. You go into a management meeting and you think everyone else in your management team's wrong. So I'm going to give you a little metric. About 2 to 3, maybe 4 times a year tops, everybody in the room is going to say, go do this. If you don't 3 to 4 times a year say, you're all wrong and I'm doing this, you probably aren't doing your right job as a CEO. And notice it wasn't 0, and notice it wasn't 40. The key number is that about 2 or 3 times a year, you got to do what Scott did and said, you know, all of you want me to sign the term sheet to make payroll, but I'm saying no because it's the wrong thing to do. And God, I got to tell you, there's no room lonelier than the corner office at your company. Now, he doesn't have a corner office. It's not that kind of company, but you get the analogy. There's no more lonely place to be than the CEO when you go out all by yourself with no air cover. But if you're not capable of doing that 2 or 3 times a year, you're probably not going to be a good CEO, because that judgment of when to do that is what separates the winners from the losers in the game.
Questions? All right, how about some questions?
Question. My name is Chris Verma. I have been in the Silicon Valley for a few decades. Question, Paul, to you is this. What is the top 3 technology you see for next 3 years where you will be willing to fund?
Okay, so you're going to be very disappointed with this answer. I don't ask that question at my fund. Almost all funds in general are thesis-oriented investors. Oh, 3D printing is going to be big. Oh, cannabis is going to be big. Our fund doesn't work that way. We are a very blue-collar fund, and what I mean by that is a guy like Scott walks into my office, he goes, hey Martino, I figured this thing out. I just need 3 more quarters of sales growth until the rest of Silicon Valley figures out how awesome my company is. So I'm in FanDuel in the fantasy sports world. I'm in a .org fundraising platform. I'm in Derby Jackpot in New York, which is a front end to off-track betting for the Kentucky Derby. I'm in Mango Health, which is a company that does adherence so that you take betting space of all things. The guy has an app called WebPix, and he's basically come up with a really interesting way to get brides to do all their wedding photos. You remember you used to have those little cameras on the table? He's like, well no, use this app and all the photos will be available instantaneously. And that was a cute idea, and I told him, I said, well, you know, you kind of got some interesting numbers, but, you know, come back when you're somewhere. So he got me on his monthly mailing list, and he mailed me about a month later with some numbers, and a month later from another. But about the 4th month in, I looked at his numbers again, I was like, 14% of all US brides use your product? But literally, so I mean, I literally go back to my partners. I'm like, remember that crazy guy? And by the way, he's funny. He's like 6'2". He's this tattooed up guy. And this guy comes in. He has 14% of all brides in the United States use this app. And so my data analyst was looking at the trajectory of growth from the 1% he was at when I met him 4 months ago to the 14% he was at 4 months later. We're like, holy shit! This guy has gone from an order of magnitude more traction in this space. And his cost of acquisition of each of the brides, it turns out that's an inherently viral type thing, because every bride has one bridesmaid probably getting married within the next year. So he had cracked this awesome viral loop. And we're like, holy crap, this is amazing. And so we did an out-of-geography deal in a strange company in the wedding space in North Carolina, primarily because we told him no, but we wanted to see more, and he came back with more. So when the no is a numbers no, the door is open. But when it's a no about the category, trust me, there are a lot of no's that really are no's, and you're just going to annoy people to keep pounding.
Another thing on timing too, I mean, fundraising really is about, from an entrepreneur's perspective, is all about storytelling. And you have to pick and choose when the story is at peak, because the story is not always going up. The story is going like this. So you literally have to pick a local maximum and time it right so that you can basically, even if like right after they invest it goes down for a little while, you have to make sure that you're getting it on the upswing so that you get the best terms, you can get in the door, all these things. So I think you know, one way to think about that is the whole startup process in the first several years, actually maybe forever, but especially the first couple of years is all about validating assumptions. Everyone probably knows that, at least startup and all that. But really, it's about you come in with a bunch of assumptions, and essentially you're just trying to de-risk the entire idea. And you may pivot, you may not, but really just about trying to validate assumptions as you go. You have to pick like a new learning that you have to really figure out something that, like you said, you crack the code on the viral loop or something.
Yep.
So like a significant learning that happened, like recognize that and say, all right, something just happened that was a kind of a breakthrough in the business. And raise like 6 months after that. So basically, you crack the code, and then you use the next 6 months to get enough traction to prove that it actually was a code you cracked, like it was a significant thing, and then use that momentum to raise. For us, it was distribution. We came into the business thinking, hey, we're going to be, I mean, we honestly, I said earlier, we were around the time like Indiegogo started and Kickstarter, so we thought we would actually be more of a model that looked like that. Transactions only, no subscription, no sales team really. And the big thing for us, the big learning was, hey, it turns out you actually, we thought sales teams, ew, like Lacey and all these guys that didn't have sales teams, we used to admire them, we were so, like, they were like idols. It turns out you actually need a sales team to connect with in a B2B environment. It's almost critical. And so what we ended up doing was we hired our first 5 salespeople and got pretty good at selling. And we used our sales traction and numbers, and we went and raised, you know, that's what we basically raised the $3 million around. We were still early, but for these guys and a few others, they saw something in the unit economics around the sales team, and they were like, if this got $3 more million right now, like where would they be in 12 months? And man, if they could do that, they could really take off, and they could raise a significant B.
Scott is making one of my all-time favorite points to make to entrepreneurs. Keith Raboy once said it to me this way, and I have to attribute it back to him because it was such a brilliant thing he said to me. Keith's over at Coastal. He's one of the best investors anywhere in Silicon Valley, if you ever have the fortune of running across him. He said the following thing to me, and it's just so seared in my head. He said, Martino, all these venture guys have this kind of advantage, you know, they have the big checkbooks and they get to put you through the process. The weapon we have as entrepreneurs, and this is when I was still CEO as opposed to a venture guy, I'm now one of those awful people, is the secret weapon we have is when we raise. That's where the information asymmetry that Scott's talking about can defray the power of the cabal of the venture people deciding if and when to invest. And if you can time it to be near a local maximum, you can essentially mitigate all of the power of the cabal making a decision because you've picked the time at which to raise. And that is a tremendously valuable lesson because that's the weapon you wield when you want to go and actually figure out how to raise.
And like they say, you know, $0 of revenue sometimes is more attractive than $1 of revenue because the promise of something is still there at 0. Right. Well, it's the same exact concept. For every up and down, you know, you get it on the uprise, and basically, you know, before it goes down, because it's inevitably going to go down again and up. You sell the promise. So that's why I said 6 months is you don't want to wait too long because you could screw yourself. So you have the breakthrough and you see the momentum, and then you go raise right then. You sell the promise of what the breakthrough can be, and that's what the whole pitch deck is about.
I gotta say, it's just unbelievable. My second Keith Raboy quote is the same thing. There are 3 things, again, Keith Raboy, 3 things. There's no proof, positive proof, and negative proof. Don't show up with negative proof, so if you don't show up with negative proof, that means don't end up in a spot where it didn't work, because no proof is better than negative proof. Obviously, positive proof is the best. But again, think about that in terms of if you're going to go raise money. Are you just in front of a point in which you might have negative or positive proof? If so, maybe that's a local maximum. And that's it. That's what the CEO's judgment's all about.
Thanks much.
Questions?
That was some of my favorite things there. That was good.
Questions? Anyone have any more questions? Back.
I don't know, Mike. You talked briefly about investing in North Carolina company as well as New York. Also kind of made the comment about geography being global. Is there a reason why North Carolina as well as New York kind of popped up on your radar? Or any tips or just kind of comments on that? Okay,
so I am a very weird investor. I am a very unusual and unorthodox venture fund. So I'm going to kind of give you that word of warning. What's going on? Okay, so I will give you that word of warning. You know, there are 225 institutional micro VC funds at this point in time. And I would say 10 of them are crazy, weird, and subversive like me. And I think if you ask the other 225, they would say the same thing. So 215 of them are very much doing the same thing, and there's about 10 of us who do this weird other thing. And so we have made our bones by finding those deals that fits the demeanor of the general partners. It fits the way we operated as very contrarian CEOs. We were always the people who kind of wanted to thumb our nose. Our original pitch deck for our fund was called Subversive Ventures, right? When that's your code name of your venture fund, you're going to think really differently. So I always kind of, at the end of a talk like this, I go, I know I've given you some advice, but do recognize I'm the 1 or 10 out of 215 versus everyone else you're going to talk to. So if you're like, wow, that Martino guy was awesome, pitching's going to be great. Well, there's only a 1 in whatever chance that you're going to get someone like me on the other side. And that's why we did a deal in San Diego. We did a deal in Edinburgh, Scotland called FanDuel, right? We did a deal in North Carolina called WebPix. And the dirty secret is, I think the reason more people don't do that is it's hard and it's work and you got to hop on planes and you get a little bit lazy and comfortable once you're in the venture business.
The other thing is, I think, I was introed to Paul through a really close advisor of mine who had been a portfolio company of Bullpen. And I was in San Diego, and he happened to have San Diego roots, so that was actually how we got connected. So, point being, I think this is one of the strongest intros to another investor is through an entrepreneur, especially their entrepreneur, if possible. But even if they just know of that person, that's actually really, really strong. More so, I would take that intro over even potentially an intro from one of my own investors. You can actually play it one way. You do the initial intro from your colleague or another entrepreneur, and then you have your VC or investor back channel some good support and like a thumbs up afterwards. But the initial intro through another entrepreneur is priceless.
Yeah, and so Scott is the first investment in our second fund, and our first investment from the first fund was Assistly. Alex Bard was the CEO of Assistly. He's now the CEO of Campaign Monitor after being a bigwig at Salesforce. And our first deal in the fund was introduced by the first deal we ever invested in. And you're going to see that social network be one of the most powerful networks you can get involved in.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you, Paul, your subversive approach to investing, has that been paying off for you consistently in your experience? Is your hit rate better than the other 215?
Can you just repeat the question so people
the question is being subversive working? The short answer is yes. Our first fund has a chance to be one of the all-time great funds in terms of return profile of the last decade. And I'm not saying that to brag, I'm saying it because you asked the question. We have a legitimate shot at $10 billion companies and 34 deals in the fund. That is an off-the-charts rate that would, if we do that, which we have a legit shot at, that would put us in some very, very unusual territory. Now the question is, were we lucky in that first fund, or is that a systematic thing we can repeat? And I'll only know the answer to that question in another 3 or 4 years. But we think that subversive, go against the grain thing is way more repeatable than the herd thing. I think the herd thing is a lot tougher because you're undifferentiated. I think if you ask Scott or other entrepreneurs in our portfolio, they would almost universally say, I pitched the guys at Bullpen, that was a really weird meeting because our product that we offered back to the entrepreneur was different. And that, I feel like, is a way more sustainable thing than people like me more, or I'm more famous than this other guy, or whatever. That seems like a really difficult thing to put in a bottle and repeat over and over again. So, but only time gets to tell in this business, which is hard.
Thank you.
Question at the back.
What are your typical investment sizes do you have?
So we tend to write a $500,000 to $1 million check into a round that's about 2 to 4 million, which is also highly unusual. It's another piece of our differentiation. We tend to only take 20 to 35% of the round. Most of the other firms on Sand Hill, they want 95% of the round and sharp elbow everybody else out. Our whole model is to let the existing investors double down on their winners in our round before the big boys show up afterwards. So a very typical round for us is a $3 million round at a $10 million pre. We put up $1 million, the existing investors put up $1 million, and some angels who couldn't get in the prior round, as well as a third party like a Venture 51 come in. And so again, a very unusual syndicate structure consistent with our whole subversive different model.
So you're looking at about a third equity.
Yeah, so we only end up owning 7–8% of the companies, which is also unusual. Most venture funds, I gotta own 20 points, I gotta move all the tonnage because I have a big fund. And the only way that this really works is if you have an appropriately sized fund. And so you can do this magic when you run a 25, 35, 50, maybe $75 million fund. You can't do it if you run a $200, $800 million fund because you can't put $1 million into Classy. You have to wait until you get to put $18 million into Classy. And that's where this big kind of almost two parallel universes of venture capital exist on Sand Hill Road now. You've got early micro funds, sub $100 million, who almost have a completely different business model than the traditional big funds who have to pile tonnage in. So we call them option buyers versus life cycle investors. And Bullpen lives on the fact that there's an impedance mismatch between the two business models. The guy who wrote the $18 million check to him and the angels in front have different business models. We capitalize on the fact that those two sets of investors have different business models to do our magic. And again, to your question, that's why I go to bed at night excited as an entrepreneur still more than a fund manager about what I do, because that feels like a defensible thing.
You know, just talking about taking the right money from the right folks, I think very critical is as you start, embarking on the journey looking for venture capital, is really figuring out who will get, kind of what you're doing, and even if, they don't have portfolio companies, because you are somewhat unique in the Valley, but finding the right firm and then the right venture partner within the firm. So if you have certain core competencies in your team that you're lacking, maybe you're at the scale stage, right? And you look at the venture partners of the firm that you think will really get you, and someone that's built a business, you scaled it, sold it for $150 million, they probably get scale. And I think with Scott, looking at all the alternatives, one of the things that Scott was really looking for was someone that would add value, but that would also help create and build the Series B round. And I think, Bullpen was identified because Scott got the warm and fuzzies, from when he was chatting to them, that they really would help in putting that together. And that's exactly what happened now with this round.
Yeah, we had to basically raise a pre-B for a couple of reasons. But one of the main ones was the optics of coming in with no institutional backers. That's probably not always 100% important to the B. But, again, Paul and Bullpen and a few others were willing to take that risk earlier than we thought a B person would, putting in 10, 15, and now it's $18 million into a round. We never would have been able to raise this round if Bullpen and a few others hadn't invested before. And then we just carved out, like, hey, where do we want to be together when we go out and raise the B? The last, if there's no more questions, I wanted to talk about the B process like a tad. We're about to close the round in like 3 days. Literally, I think on is it Thursday? So we're going to close on Monday. And it's $18 million. And one of the things, I think, the biggest takeaways for this entire round was, one of the things I wanted to add is that we were raising it 6 months before our actual target date. So we identified with Bullpen and our investors, and we said, we want to go out and raise in Q3 or Q4 because our revenue will be here. This will be, these metrics will look like this, and the multiple will be satisfactory to the investors and also the founders. Dilution will be about right. You have these ranges. And we were like, wouldn't it be awesome if we just didn't have to wait that long to raise the money and we could actually raise it now at like, a similar valuation? So we brainstormed on that, and the strategy that we came up with was, even though we're raising in basically a year, this was about around the winter time, why don't we start now and go out with basically a pre-deck, it wasn't even a B deck, and just literally have some meetings, we'll make some strong intros and have meetings with firms, and literally make them get to know you meetings. And this wouldn't have necessarily worked at the seed level necessarily, although I think some of it would have, but it was a great strategy for us here. And the way we phased the meetings, so the first meetings that we had with firms were ones that we thought would be a mediocre fit. And by that I mean, we just weren't sure about them. They weren't our top choice. But we were like, oh, they're interesting. We know something about an entrepreneur likes these guys. Let's learn about them, and they can learn about us. And through those meetings, we actually got a couple soft no's, or not even no's, sort of pushes, like, oh, you're too early or whatever. And we learned a lot about where we were at, and we kept learning as we were going. So we literally broke up the round into phased introductions. So basically, phase one was like sort of mediocre fit companies that we felt. Phase two was more interesting. Phase three was we thought would be the best fit. it turns out, and the strategy was like the ones that are super interested will actually bubble to the surface, and they'll actually start getting more aggressive because they realize you're starting to go out and sort of soft circle this stuff. And that's exactly what happened. It was actually a phase 2 VC that became extremely interested, and they happened to be one of the top tier ones that we were going after. They weren't initially our first pick, but what we learned about them was that they were probably the best fit we would ever find for various reasons, and we wouldn't have known that if we had just gone out and focused on the phase 3 VCs that we had assumed were the right fit. So we never even actually made it to phase 3. We found our perfect fit in phase 2 who bubbled to the surface, basically became almost just as aggressive as we were because they wanted to win the deal and not have to go through this aggressive fundraise, and it ended up working out. I will say that this was kind of an ideal scenario. It's never worked like this for us in the past. And I credit it mainly to starting really early and just having the patience to have these conversations and learn about the different investors over time. And the old, words of advice, you raise when you don't need to, is actually very, very true. We've raised with, people say it takes 6 months. It does take 6 months, but it really actually takes longer because you have to create you create basically a pipeline, almost like a sales pipeline from an entrepreneur's perspective. And you literally have a whole strategy of how to get introductions and go through this process. I would give yourself 8 months, 9 months, 10 months at least to fundraise a proper round of $5 million and above.
How many frogs did you kiss?
A lot.
See,
I've done a lot worse than that.
it's all water. And just going to your point as well, Scott, the type of VCs or investors that you go for, there are some that just say they're really founder-friendly, and then there are some that really are founder-friendly. And it's amazing, dealing with Bullpen in the prior round, negotiating with them. It was amazing. So few comments came back on the docs. This round, this mega round, I think there were 10 comments on the docs. I called Scott up, I said, man, you are one lucky son of a bitch. These guys really are true founders, investors. And I think, Scott got that feeling by getting to know them. He got that feeling. The conversations on the couple of things that we're negotiating, I think, it's been absolutely borne out. So, really important.
I think you had a question. One thing to interject there, I just wanted to say, these new guys too, I think the right VCs, the right partners are against the sort of going against the grain type of folks, and they don't want to feel like they're just thrown into this mix of investors that are all circling around this deal. At least the best ones, I don't. During this process, they wanted to start early to get to know us, not because they had made the decision to invest, but they were like, we don't want to deal with all this BS that's going to happen later. In fact, if you get down the road and you're talking to 20 VCs, we're out. Like, we just don't even want to be part of that mess. Yep. We want to get to know you genuinely, and that was exactly how these guys were. It was like they wanted to talk before we got down to that whole process. And as an entrepreneur, you have to remember that and respect it. So we had an opportunity actually to go out and probably get a second or third term sheet, and we said no. We're not even going to, because there are several people that were interested at this point, just good ones, and we basically just said no. We're not even going to try to get a second or third term sheet. We're going to respect the verbal agreement we made to basically almost lock in with them before we even signed anything. So that mutual respect was huge, I think.
And what recommendations do you have for finding finding investors for your seed round?
So exercise for the reader. Anyone remember what we said? Anyone? Question over here. Your lawyer. I'm telling you, your lawyer, your lawyer, your lawyer. I know that sounds so bizarre, but every round I ever did as a CEO, I went to my lawyer. The last round I did, I mentioned Randy Komisar from Kleiner was the guy. It was great. Let me tell you how this conversation went. It was perfect. It was my third company. I had just done Tribe with Mark Pincus before. I'm doing aggregate knowledge in 2005. I walk in this guy's office. He looks at me and goes, yeah, Martino, I looked at your list of venture people you want to go talk to. Randy Komisar at Kleiner is going to do this deal. I said, okay. I walked into Randy's office. 5 minutes into the meeting, Randy said, yeah, I think this is a deal I'll do. So it wasn't that the deal was done, it was that his matchmaking ability was so spot on that the minute we met each other, but it's because his database is so big. See, the beauty of guys like this, he has an aggregated database anonymized across all of his customers. I can't tell you, as my PhD work was in high performance computing and data predictive modeling, I can't tell you how valuable a data set like that is on an anonymized and aggregated basis. Because guess it allows very obvious insights to be able to be passed on without breaching any confidences from anybody. So who in general has that kind of database other than a trusted advisor like a lawyer? Now, very common investors and angels can also do this, but they tend not to be as good at it because it's not their day job. But I can't tell you how much time of not kissing frogs I saved because I had an attorney time and time again at each of my companies who knew exactly who the right investor was for that deal.
But you know, you mentioned seed, right? So I just want to qualify what you're saying, so that all my clients here don't say, oh, seed. You know, the average seed deal, the second half of 2014 was around $1.5 million and a pre-money of around about $6 million. Those are the median software deals in 2014. You know, if you're talking about a seed, which is much, you know, $100,000, $200,000, you know, that's not really a seed. That's kind of the friends and family. And there, I speak for myself. I probably can't help my clients there because where you are so early, the people that are really going to invest in you at that stage are the people that know you, know of you, or you know have some sense that you're the type of person that can execute. And you know, at that early stage, I don't think.
No, it's exactly right. And I just want to make sure that we're not trying to sound cute. About $1.5 million is where that works, and that's exactly right. If you, again, seed doesn't mean seed anymore. There's friends and family and Kickstarter and incubators and all. There's the pre-seed world, and if you need 50 grand to 100 grand to go do something, no. Isn't that what you charge per hour?
We outsource to China. But I think what's really important, and something that Scott said, is to get to know your investors. You know, if I don't know an investor, there's a list of about 20 questions that I give to my CEOs and say, don't ask for references because no one's going to give you a reference, you know, for someone that they've killed, right? Just go onto the website and pick 3 or 4 or 5 portfolio companies and ask these questions. So in 2008, when the crap hit the fan, you know, what happened? Did they stand by you? You know, did they support you? Or did they just make you grab your ankles and say, hey, well, there was one firm that sat around this deck, yeah, that said basically, you know, it's coming. The down round is coming and it's coming in a big way. So you need to do your diligence, and I think getting to know your investors very early is absolutely critical. Having coffee, meeting them, so that they can get to know you, but I think as important is for you to get to know them.
Yeah, in a really early company too, if you do friends and founders or friends and family around, a couple 100,000, I would say the next way to sort of branch out beyond that is to build a phenomenal advisory board and don't ask them to invest. So one way, I mean, you basically put your money where your mouth is. You'll be able to reach that way and pull someone into the company. If you go to them directly and say, will you invest? They're going to be like, who are you? But if you say, here's what I'm doing, I want you involved, it'll be lightweight commitment, just join this advisory board, I'm going to give you some options, and let me prove to you that this is something, you know, we're onto something here. And so we actually had a bunch of our advisors invest later, and then those advisors ended up making the intros to institutions and others along the way. The other thing is, you know, one thing we did early on, I don't know if this is normal or not, and Roger probably, I think was mad at us for doing this, but we basically would give our advisors a 2-for-1 deal. We basically say, like, here's 25,000 options, and if you invest $10,000, we'll give you 10,000 more options, essentially. And so, is that normal? Or is that even legal?
It's creative.
Yeah.
Beg,
so basically,
beg, borrow, steal.
Yeah. So basically, incentivizing them to get involved financially, because that's a form of commitment and actually goes a long way. So if an advisor has been there for say a year and they make the intro, the first question they're getting back is, did you invest? But you also don't want to ask them to invest right away. So you've got to have a period of time where you prove to them, and hopefully they'll invest. You sweeten the deal enough where they do, and that's that first level of validation that will help with the intros tremendously.
Sorry. I'm just wondering, how much time do you divide between fundraising versus actually working?
It's a good question. You know, it comes in waves. So we started this fundraising process in Q4, and luckily it took about 6 months, but we were targeting Q3, Q4. I would say it was 70% of my time, honestly. really intensive this time around, just because of the stage we're at. The Series B is just a lot more work and a lot more meetings. Early on, it was a little bit more like sporadic, kind of all over the road. I mean, the $5 million that I was referencing earlier, the angel money. I mean, we would raise it 100,000 at a time, and we had like the worst path to $5 million ever. It was like we basically give ourselves 3 months of runway, and then all of a sudden we're worrying about payroll again. It was the most stressful strategy ever. I don't recommend it. But that's what we had to do. We had to basically claw our way to credibility and to traction. So we did what we had to do.
So let me give one big truth in advertising here, though. So what Scott's saying about intensive process, raising $18 million all in, absolutely right. But in the kind of $1.5 million and below pre-seed and seed world, the absolute best practice for a CEO is for fundraising to be an ongoing 20% of your time. And that is very different than it used to be. And so I wrote an article that I posted on TechCrunch 2 years ago that was called Seed as a Process. And what the article was all about is how the very best entrepreneurs are completely gaming the system. By taking meetings continuously in small volumes, you've lined everything up once you've hit that milestone that he's talking about when it's time to raise, so that whoever's ready has already been briefed. This is a way better way if you're a CEO to manage your time. So instead of it being intensive 70–80% of your time for 6 months, no. It's 20% of your time the whole first year, and you take a little bit here, you hit a milestone, you take a little bit there. And you know the beauty of that is, you do it at a higher valuation each time, and the amount of equity you preserve when you play that game right is unbelievable. You should see what the cap tables look like for the CEOs who have played that game well. You sit there and go, oh my God, I can't believe you own this much of the company, because by the time you bring down your 18 million bucks, you did it in drips and drabs at a higher and higher price each step of the way. And it's a thing of beauty when you can pull that off.
Yeah, we kind of did that, but it was by accident.
Yeah, Scott was a pioneer by accident, right?
It wasn't by accident, you know.
By necessity.
He raised on the convertible debt. Scott raised on the convertible debt. He didn't know what convertible debt was. He said, like, what should we do? I said, do this. He said, okay.
Yep.
He said, no, I sell it. So I said, oh, well, just...
Roger had a convertible note with no cap and ridiculous terms, so founder friendly, and I just, without knowing, I just went out and sold it the best I could. People were like, why is there no cap on the conversion? Why is the discount rate so low? And I was like, I know, that's just the way it is. You know, just,
and he sold it.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm just the CEO.
Okay, one more.
All right. Yeah.
Who hasn't had a question?
Yeah. Wow.
Who hasn't? I know that people wanted questions. Who hasn't had one? Okay.
When during the fundraising process do you start mentioning valuation numbers?
Never.
Never. Yeah.
Never. No, I mean that completely. Up until the point you're doing a big round, the valuation should be imputed. And what I mean by that is, how much money do you need for 12 to 18 months, and what percent does the aggregate syndicate need to own of your company to do the deal? The valuation is the therefore of an equation that you then solve. And I always tell my CEOs this: how much does that firm need? How much are your milestones going to cost you to hit? Oh, therefore my valuation is blank. And when it goes that way, before you're in a spot where you can do a discounted cash flow and you're into that world, which I imagine most people in this room are way before that world, you do it that way and your life is a hell of a lot easier, because that's a much more, what do you need, what do I need, let's solve a problem, very collaborative approach, leads to the right dynamic with the investor, and you know, no one gets insulted and feelings hurt once you approach it that way.
Yeah, one of the mistakes we made was we tried to over-optimize for valuation early on. So we would sort of, we were really sensitive about a $5 million valuation versus like an $8 million or $9 million, and we would talk about it so much internally. And at the end of the day, what we should have been optimizing for is an amazing investor and partner early on, because it would have made our life a lot easier early on. And we didn't. We optimized for valuation. Now, we probably saved a little bit of the cap table, but we took longer to basically get there. So it's a trade-off. But I would say early on I would have optimized for the right type of investor once we had enough traction to attract the right type of investor, versus trying to always figure out like the percentages and stuff. Because at the end of it, you're going to give up a decent amount of the company in the beginning if you're doing this right. But if you do it fast enough and you're growing fast enough, it'll even out at the end for the entrepreneur.
And an entrepreneur obsessed with the valuation is such a red flag. I just can't tell you what a... It comes across even when you don't think it comes across, and it just leads to all sorts of antibodies right out of the gate. It's like, really, is that, you're that fixated because your other the other company that you used to work with, that guy got that number? Come on.
Alrighty, right before we go, and before I say thank you, Cameron, 30 seconds on Buddha.
Yeah, well,
I couldn't find you in the beginning.
No. Well, thank you all for coming. I know you all have been sitting down for a while, but I just wanted to introduce Buddha. That's the place you're at currently right now. We're a unique startup ecosystem, a little bit of a different flavor from some of the other co-working spaces. We have offices and desks, obviously, but what we like to do is to work with companies individually and help them accelerate and reach their goals. We have a couple programs here that we work with. We have a growing venture wing called Boot Up Ventures. We have Boot Up Academy. We just finished a program with Verizon Ventures as well. And so I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs here, people looking, but most of all, we have services for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So we'll do a quick little tour in the back, and if you have any questions, I'd love to meet all of you. I'll be standing in the back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Stay. Okay.